Hi everybody and welcome to week 1. This week we're going to talk about collection policies. All libraries have limited budgets, space, and time. So an objective of collecting everything for everyone is just not possible. Essentially, this means that choices have to be made, and how those choices get made is where mission statements and collection management policies come in. In this section, I'm going to describe how vision, mission, and value statements inform collection management policies and lead into collection objectives, and how the success of those objectives can be tracked through benchmarks. So let's get started. So where it all begins is with the most broad statement that a library may have, and this is a vision statement. Not all libraries have vision statements, but when they do, they define the core values and beliefs that drive the organization. And I gave 2 examples here. The Plymouth District Library, where I work, our vision statement is PDL is the heart of an inclusive community that is engaged and empowered to shape a more vibrant future. I also like the Milwaukee Public Library's vision statement, which says they are an anchor institution that helps build healthy families and vibrant neighborhoods, the foundation of a strong Milwaukee. Mission statements often include language about providing materials for reading or research interests of a community. So I gave the example from Milwaukee again. Their vision statement said they help build families and neighborhoods, and their mission statement indicates what services they will provide in order to achieve that vision. The Plymouth District Library vision statement focuses on inclusion and empowerment, and our mission statement says we will create connections and opportunities that make that happen. So connecting this to library collections, if a library's purpose is to support research interests, its collection is likely to be made up of scholarly and intellectual materials. If its purpose is to meet cultural or recreational needs, its collection probably has more popular and mainstream materials. And then we have values statements. Value statements are sometimes called core values, or they're sometimes listed as keywords rather than as full statements. So the American Library Association has a document called the Core Values for Librarianship, and it provides a good template. Access, confidentiality and privacy, democracy, diversity, education and lifelong learning, intellectual freedom, preservation, the public good, professionalism, service, social responsibility, and sustainability. They have a lot of them. Most public libraries, even academic libraries, don't have that many, core values for their service. The ALA has that many because they are the core values for librarianship. But it's still a good list of keywords that you could pull from. So choose core values that relate to your community's needs and the services that your library offers. PDL is a third place or a third space in our community, and we provide literal comfortable spaces to hang out. So comfort is one of our values. Core values. We're generous with our time, our expertise, our spaces, our resources. So generosity is one of our core values. We provide quality collections, quality programs, quality services. We hire the best. We provide the best service. So quality is one of our core values. And our last one is collaboration. We collaborate with the community, with community organizations and our community partners, and we collaborate with library cooperatives, and we provide collaborative spaces for people to use. So to recap, a vision statement defines the library's purpose. A mission statement describes how the organization will achieve that purpose. And value statements or core values are sometimes entwined in vision statements, but they label the library's guiding principles with sort of foundational standards of practice. Each of these statements helps inform library procedures and policies in a holistic manner, ensuring that every service, every collection, every program that the library offers contributes to its big picture goals and its purpose for existing. So moving now into collection management policies, and you'll notice that I tend to call it collection management versus collection development. You're not wrong either way. It's completely fine. We like to point out that a collection management policy sort of indicates that you're managing that entire collection life cycle, where a development implies growth. You're not always growing a collection, you're not always developing a collection, but you are always managing a collection. And I want to point out that collection management policies are not selection policies. They incorporate the entire life cycle of the collection. A good collection management policy helps staff make decisions that affect that entire collection life cycle. They also help collection managers ensure that the library's collection helps it achieve that mission, vision, values, its strategic goals. Purpose, who the collection is for and what will be collected. Is the collection for all ages? Is it for researchers? Is it for medical professionals or attorneys? What is the purpose of the collection? What is it meant? Who is it meant to serve? And what will be collected? The scope of the collection. Broad collections have lots of materials on a wide variety of subjects and formats. Narrow or deep collections have less subject coverage and more materials on specific subjects. So a law library has a very narrow and deep collection on law materials. Most public libraries have very broad scoped collections with lots of materials on a wide variety of subjects and formats. A collection philosophy is also nice to include in the collection management policy. A collection philosophy for a public library could state that its collection is intended to serve general interests, lifelong learning, personal enrichment, whereas a special interest or an academic library collection might serve professional interests, academic research, or even preservation purposes. Collection philosophies are tied directly to the library's overarching vision, mission, and core values, and they set the direction for how the library collection will embody those foundational principles. As strategic planning and high-level goals and objectives are put in place at the level of the organization, the library has to pivot their collection strategy to help meet those initiatives. Policies can be formatted in all kinds of different ways, by collection, by format, by audience, or they can focus on general criteria for inclusion or exclusion from a collection, the collection philosophy and diversity statements. When libraries decide to separate otherwise similar materials, they've already decided that those materials are unique to their library and to their users in some way. For example, fiction for youth versus fiction for adults. Library of things, collections that enhance accessibility like large print or braille books. They might be the same titles in each of those collections, but they were separated for the service they provide. Maybe you have a title in large print and a title in audio. Same title, separated into different collections for the service they provide. The collection policy should point out the reasons why they've been separated. What makes them different in terms of selection, purchasing, processing, use, maintenance, and what criteria will be for weeding them. Collection management policies may also include a community profile. This connects the demographics and the community needs to the materials that are being collected by the library. And it helps the library to identify what's important to the people who use its collections. It can include special facts or trivia about the community, like it's the horse capital of Michigan, or the home of the Strawberry Festival, or whatever it is that makes that community special. Community profiles can include diversity of the residents in terms of age, race, nationality, language, educational attainment, things like that. It can give business and labor industry information, like who the major employers are, if the community, commute to work, or if there are a lot of home-based workers. local school information, both public and private. What are the student counts, the per pupil expenditures? What is the school's focus? Are they religious schools, technology schools, art schools, or whatever else there may be? What are those graduation rates? Economic data like the average annual income or the percent of the population that falls within the poverty limit, poverty line. Housing information like how many people rent versus own, how many vacant properties are in the community, what is the average house price. The census provides all of that information. So, if they are the horse capital of Michigan, should their collection highlight on information about horses? Should they focus on car repair and classic car collecting materials if automotive engineering is a major driver of their industry, like it is here in Detroit? Dearborn, Michigan is the home of the headquarters of Ford Motor Company. So materials on car repair, classic car collecting, automotive engineering, are probably pretty important in that community. If the unemployment or graduation rates indicate, that those are low rates, maybe the library needs, maybe that indicates a need for job search and college preparation materials. A full community needs assessment can round this out even more and lead to a robust community profile that describes the people and the purposes that the library's collection serve. These policies need to be updated regularly because formats change, and even the library's collection philosophy and its mission can change, over time from year to year. Any major incident of local, national, or even global scale can change the library's collection focus. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, many public libraries needed to focus their collection goals on public health information, technology skills for those who were new to working from home or remote education, and e-resources for remote access. Major incidents like those can also have an impact on funding for collection development, forcing staff to redirect funds or revise their collection budgets entirely. Maybe donations and grants will be more aggressively sought to lessen the impact of a lower collection, budget. Each year, the library's collection management policy should be re-examined to ensure its relevancy. You don't have to overhaul it every year, but give it a read through every year and just see, if something needs to be tweaked. A student a while back introduced me to the acronym IDEA, which stands for Inclusion, Diversity, Equity and Equality, and Access. So a meaningful collection management policy must consider all four of these things: inclusion, diversity, equity and equality, and access, and also intellectual freedom. Library collections must ensure fairness and access, regardless of any defining characteristic of the user. They should be inclusive of differing ideas, different worldviews, different lifestyles. They should represent the diversity of the communities they serve, but also cultural opportunities to learn about diverse communities in other parts of the world. The article cited on this slide by Bruno and Moser describes the idea of windows and mirrors. It focuses on school libraries, but it definitely applies well to public libraries too. This is the idea that libraries should have materials that reflect, like mirrors, the identities of the people using them, and offer windows to see into or learn about different cultures, lifestyles, and worldviews. Including philosophy statements like these in a collection management policy, it helps collection managers at all stages of the collection life cycle, selecting diverse, equitable, inclusive materials, labeling and cataloging them appropriately, focusing readers' advisory and displays on diverse materials to encourage their use, and including inclusion, diversity, equity, access in weeding criteria. Andrea Jameson's article, the one cited on the right side of this slide, points out that policies need to include definitions and examples of diversity throughout the document, rather than just a mention under one subheading. We don't have an IDEA statement. We include those concepts throughout each section of the collection management policy. Including these statements in collection policies formalizes the library's intention into prescribed action. There is also an element of protection that comes from including IDEA and intellectual freedom statements and examples in collection management policies. It protects patrons and staff from external pressures to censor, and creates equitable procedures for handling those formal challenges to library materials. The reverse is also true, that a collection management policy that clearly ties the collection to the library's mission allows staff to consider diversity and intellectual freedom when making the most appropriate choices for their collections. They can carefully decide which collection to include materials in, adult versus youth, for example, and to reject materials that clearly do not meet collection guidelines, not because of personal preference or opinion, but because they are irrelevant to the library's established purpose and audience. IDEA, intellectual freedom, and a procedure for handling those formal challenges to the collection must be included in the library's collection management policy. Collection management policies often call for a balance of viewpoints among the materials in the collection. But how do libraries avoid misinformation and propaganda? There's a difference between materials that confirm pre-existing bias and, refute scientific or scholarly consensus, and those which are high quality, scholarly, backed by reputable presses, but which may represent opinions outside the mainstream. Two different things. Collection managers have to be careful to vet authors and publishers to ensure that a balance of viewpoints in the collection is one that facilitates critical thinking. So now we have a working foundation in policy and values, and it's time to combine those foundational statements and values with collection objectives. Essentially, objectives are for the staff, the selector, and involve taking our foundation in policy and values and translating it into meaningful actions. Where policy says we will collect audiobooks, for example, the objectives will tell us what kind. Objectives are like an action plan for the librarian. Take a look at the slide presented. The policy gives us the purpose of this collection as providing public access to spoken recordings of print material. The policy indicates that audiobooks provide an accessible format for the visually impaired. The policy indicates that the library will purchase audiobooks for listeners of all ages. The objectives take this one step further and offer even more detail about which audiobooks selectors will add to the collection. The collection objectives listed on this slide: select current fiction titles that are unabridged. Select popular and current nonfiction titles that are unabridged. Select classic titles which continually have demand. We're not choosing or keeping classic titles simply because they're classic titles. We have taken that a step further and said which continually have demand. We're only going to purchase the CD format, and I'll add, the electronic format to that as well. Give lower priority to series fiction. This is an important one, to limit commitments to future purchases. Large libraries with healthy budgets may not need this statement at all. A tiny little library, with a tiny little budget, has to choose very carefully. And we all know audiobooks are ridiculously expensive. The per item cost is very high. So if you buy, the first book in a series, have you committed to finishing the series? Can you afford the space? I'm looking at you, James Patterson and Nora Roberts. If we buy one, People are going to want the rest of the series. We may or may not have the space for all that, or the budget in audio format for all that. So an objective could be to give lower priority to series fiction, to limit commitments to future purchases. That one might not be necessary in every library. Give lower priority to nonfiction titles that might become outdated or irrelevant quickly. We all know that in presidential election years, we love this candidate, we hate this candidate. Those books are popular for a hot second. The election comes and goes and no one cares. They become outdated and they become irrelevant quickly. We would not give the we would not give the space or the budget to those materials in audio format. We'll probably buy the books, but leave it at that. We have an objective to prioritize diverse books or audiobooks, wide perspectives and authenticity of authorship, and balance reflection of community demographics with materials that express the diversity of our world. I love that objective. Policy is a framework, a long view of the collection. Objectives are current and they quickly adapt to changes in technology, popularity, and community interests. Where objectives define what will be purchased or what will be done with the collection in the short run, benchmarks are the scorecard of what we're aiming for. They determine how well collections perform or if they're being used as intended. You can see in the slide that there are both external and internal benchmarks. External benchmarks measure a library's performance to a similar library. Michigan publishes a statewide directory of public libraries and a variety of benchmarks. They are also used by the state to evaluate quality. QSAC, the Quality Services Audit Checklist in Michigan, is a standards list. So these external measures include how much of the budget is for staff and how much for the collection as a ratio. There are a variety of measures available in QSAC for developing benchmarks based on external data. How does per capita circulation compare with neighboring libraries of a similar size, for example? So internal benchmarks measure how a collection is performing against itself or against similar items. In our example from the previous slide, we wouldn't be judging a new collection very harshly since it's so new. Benchmarks are what we would be aiming for in that case. Benchmarks are different for different collections. One of my favorite examples is about a Latin language material. Normally that might, be a good investment at the Vatican, but it really isn't on the radar for a public library. My coworker Mary was new at a different library in our area. And she tells this story about how she had a swarm of teenagers looking for Latin dictionaries, plural, dictionaries, multiple teenagers looking for Latin dictionaries in a variety of Latin-based literature. So come to find out, their local high school had a popular teacher who was running a Latin club. And she was sure that, she had more circulation in Latin materials than the Detroit Archdiocese. She always talks about this example to illustrate that every librarian will generate expectations about how they want their collections to perform, and every library is different. Another library in the area might not even have a Latin dictionary, and that would be perfectly appropriate for their community. In Mary's little library, she had high expectations of her Latin dictionaries because they were always in hot demand. Different items and different collections are held to different standards. Encyclopedias might have different expected use than, best-selling novels, for example. Medical or legal subject areas might have a different expected average age than history or philosophy materials. I like using benchmarks since it constantly provides goals for the collection. However, just because the library down the street has high numbers in some areas and those external benchmarks, that doesn't necessarily indicate that you need the same benchmark. It's a good starting point. It's some place to, consider, something to consider. But remember that your objectives Remember your objectives as you respond in kind to your community with internal benchmarks. Adjust your expectations and your goals and objectives for your collections accordingly. The best statements and policies for collection development practice are meaningless if collection managers are not invested in those concepts. It's important to come together as a team and discuss the main components of the policy on a regular basis. Managers should lead discussions about talking points for the public. This regular practice can prevent misinterpretation or defensive discussions with the public that staff have with the public. These regular discussions can make sure that the entire collection team is on the same page when the public has concerns. Recently, our library staff participated in a day of discussion and about processes to make sure we understood where the entire team was headed. It was called the Collection Forum. So take a look at some of these suggestions on the slide. Now think about how collection assignments and goals for collections are handled at your library. Even if you're not part of the leadership team, you can participate in discussions with other staff, even informally. Even if no one requires you to think about your role in the overall collection, make the objectives for yourself and think over, across several years. Think long term and strategically about these ideas. Remember, the collection was here before you, and hopefully it will continue long after you leave. So in conclusion, vision statements define the library's purpose. Mission statements describe how the organization will achieve that purpose. Value statements are guiding principles. Collection management policies describe the purpose and the scope of the collection. Collection philosophies describe how the collection will embody those foundational principles. Community profiles identify what's important to the people who use the collections. Statements of inclusion, diversity, equity and equality, and access formalize the library's intention into prescribed action. Collection objectives dictate what the library is hoping to accomplish with each collection, and they state criteria for selection. Collection benchmarks are a standard to help determine how well collections are performing within a variety of criteria. Staff buy-in and cohesiveness ensure that the overall collection mirrors the values and the philosophies in place. Have a great week, everybody.